London, September 14th, 1901, 11 p.m. The Royal Albert Hall sits empty except for stagehands dismantling platforms in the dark. 3 hours earlier, 2,000 people watched men strip to posing trunks under electric light while judges measured their bodies with tape and calipers. They called it the Great Competition. The winner received a gold statue of Eugen Sandow, a statue of a man awarded to a man who had transformed himself to look like a statue. In the front row, a medical doctor scribbled notes about voluntary muscular display and hypertrophy pursued for aesthetic culmination rather than labor necessity. In the back, a journalist wrote that the audience seemed hypnotized not by strength but by shape. When the lights came up, the winner stood alone on stage, holding his trophy, and for 5 seconds no one clapped because no one knew what they had just witnessed. They had watched the birth of a sport that doesn't require a ball, a track, an opponent, or a finish line. A sport where the scoreboard is your own reflection, and the reflection can lie. Was this entertainment or the invention of a new kind of madness? The problem that didn't exist until someone sold the solution. Here is a situation no one talks about. For most of human history, your body had a job. It lifted, pulled, walked, carried, climbed, defended. Your muscles existed because they had to. There was no such thing as going to the gym, because every day was the gym. Farm labor, construction, war, hunting, survival. The body was a tool that maintained itself through use. Then industrialization arrived. Within 2 generations, millions of people, men especially, found themselves sitting at desks, operating machines, riding trains, living in cities where physical labor was no longer required. The body became optional, ornamental. Machines did the lifting. Trains did the walking. Cities eliminated the climb. This created a bizarre new problem. A generation of men whose bodies no longer had a purpose. And into that vacuum walked Eugen Sandow. Sandow was born Friedrich Wilhelm Müller in Prussia, 1867. He studied anatomy. He posed nude for art classes. He understood theater. And in the 1890s, he became the first man to turn his body into a business. Not a strongman act where you lift boulders, although he did that. Not a circus attraction where you bend iron bars, although he did that too. Sandow's innovation was something stranger. He made the body itself the product. He published books with titles like Strength and How to Obtain It and Bodybuilding or Man in the Making. He sold spring grip exercisers with his name stamped on them. He opened institutes of physical culture in London, selling memberships, coaching, nutrition advice. He marketed scientific bodybuilding, the idea that muscle growth was measurable, controllable, engineered. You could build yourself like you'd build a house, beam by beam, if you followed his system. But the real genius was the shows. Sandow didn't just perform strength. He performed beauty. He posed in fig leaves and carefully arranged lighting, mimicking Greek statues. He flexed slowly, theatrically, allowing the audience to study each muscle group. He turned the male body into something you could watch the way you'd watch sculpture. And he charged admission. The shows were packed. Here's what makes this strange. The audience wasn't there to see a man lift something. They were there to see a man look a certain way. The spectacle was the shape itself. And Sandow understood that the shape could be sold infinite times. In photos, in books, in classes, in advice, in bronze statues of himself. By 1901, he had become wealthy enough to organize the Great Competition at the Royal Albert Hall. This wasn't a strength contest. It was a beauty pageant. Judges evaluated symmetry, proportion, muscular definition, stage presence. The contestants didn't compete against each other. They competed against an ideal that Sandow himself had popularized. This is where it starts to feel like a trap. Sandow wasn't just selling a method. He was selling a problem. The idea that your body, in its natural state, wasn't good enough, that you needed to transform it. That transformation was measurable, that the measurement never stopped. And once you believe that, you became a customer for life. Because here's the thing about bodybuilding. You never finish. There's no final score. No championship that makes you stop training. The goalpost moves the moment you reach it. You get bigger, so you want more definition. You get leaner, so you want more size. The pump fades. The tan fades. The photo from last month makes you look smaller than you remember feeling. And the only solution is to keep building. Sandow died in 1925. By then, bodybuilding had spread across Europe and America, but it wasn't spreading as a sport. It was spreading as an identity, a lifestyle, a loop. And the loop looked like this. You see an image of an ideal body. You feel inadequate. You buy the program, the equipment, the supplements. You train. You improve. You see a new image. The goalpost is moved. You feel inadequate again. You buy more. This wasn't fitness. This was the invention of permanent dissatisfaction, packaged as self-improvement. And it worked because the product was you. When the body stopped being a tool and became a stage. Here is what no one tells you about the early 1900s. People didn't go to gyms yet. Gyms didn't exist the way we understand them. There were athletic clubs for the wealthy, YMCA facilities for boys, and occasional strongman training halls. But the idea that a normal person would pay money every month to go to a building and lift objects up and down for no functional reason, that idea didn't make sense yet. So bodybuilding needed a new venue. It found one in two places, the magazine and the stage. Bernard McFadden launched Physical Culture magazine in 1899, the same year Sandow's books were becoming bestsellers. McFadden was half Hell Crusader, half Carnival Barker. He believed that physical perfection would cure society's ills, crime, poverty, weakness, moral decay. He also believed it would sell magazines. And he was right. Physical Culture became one of the most successful magazines in America. It ran photos of muscular men in minimal clothing. It published workout routines, diet plans, success stories. It ran contests where readers could submit their own transformation photos. It sold equipment, books, courses. It created a feedback loop. The magazine showed you what you should look like, then sold you the tools to get there, then invited you to submit proof of your progress, which would be published, inspiring others to buy the tools. This wasn't journalism. This was a closed system. But here's what makes it eerie. McFadden also believed in something called physical culture as moral purification. The body wasn't just aesthetic. It was proof of character. A weak body meant a weak mind. A strong body meant discipline, willpower, virtue. You could see someone's moral worth by looking at their muscles. This created a new kind of social pressure. Your body wasn't private anymore. It was evidence. Evidence that you were trying or that you weren't. Evidence that you had control or that you'd let yourself go. The mirror stopped being a tool for checking if you were presentable. It became a courtroom. And the magazine industry knew this. They didn't just show ideal bodies. They showed the distance between the ideal and the average. They created before and after photos. They coined terms like 97-pound weakling. They sold transformation. But transformation requires you to believe you need transforming. By the 1920s, dozens of physique magazines existed. Some focused on strength, some on health, some on what they called artistic photography of the male form. Code for images that walked a legal tightrope between fitness content and something else entirely. And this is where it gets complicated, because bodybuilding's visual culture was always dual purpose. It was sold as self-improvement, discipline, health, masculinity. But it was also consumed as spectacle, as art, as desire. The same image could mean two completely different things depending on who was looking at it. And the publishers knew this. They used classical Greek and Roman statues as justification. This isn't vanity, it's civilization. This isn't eroticism, it's art. The fig leaf became a legal shield. The flex bicep became ambiguous. Was this fitness or performance? Self-improvement or exhibition? The answer was yes. This ambiguity was useful because it expanded the market. You could sell the same content to men who wanted to look like that, and to men who wanted to look at that. You could frame it as aspiration, admiration, education, or art. The product didn't change. The framing did. And this is why bodybuilding grew in magazines before it grew in gyms. The gym required you to train in public, to be seen trying, to risk failure. The magazine was private. You could study the images alone. You could imagine yourself transformed without witnesses. You could participate in the culture without the vulnerability of actually showing up. The The stage was different. The stage required you to be seen. And by the 1920s, bodybuilding contests were happening in theaters, auditoriums, vaudeville halls. These weren't athletic competitions. They were shows. The contestants oiled their skin so it would shine under stage lights. They practiced poses in mirrors for hours, learning which angles made muscles look largest, which lighting hit flaws, which facial expressions looked heroic versus desperate. They were learning to perform their own bodies. And the audience was learning to judge. Not to judge strength. Strength is objective. To judge beauty, which is subjective and therefore infinite. There is no final answer to who has the best physique. There is only opinion, comparison, trend, taste, which means the contest never ends. The standards keep shifting, and every bodybuilder is always one trend away from being obsolete. This is a strange part. Bodybuilding created a sport where the rules are made of fashion. In track and field, you either ran faster or you didn't. In boxing, you either won the fight or you didn't. But in bodybuilding, you either matched the current ideal or you didn't, and the ideal changed every decade. In the 1920s, they wanted classical proportion. In the 1940s, they wanted athletic functionality. In the 1970s, they wanted mass. In the 1990s, they wanted mass that defied anatomy. The sport wasn't evolving toward a final form. It was evolving in circles, chasing its own reflection. The camera didn't document bodybuilding. IT invented it. Here's what photography did to the body. Before cameras became affordable and widespread, you mostly saw your own body in mirrors, in fleeting glances in dim or flattering light. You saw other bodies in person, at beaches, in communal baths, at athletic events. But you didn't see hundreds of idealized bodies every day, frozen in their best possible moment, from their best possible angle under perfect lighting. Photography changed that, and it changed it fast. By the 1910s, you could buy postcards of strongmen and bodybuilders. By the 1920s, every physique magazine was essentially a catalog of perfect bodies, perfectly lit, perfectly posed. By the 1930s, aspiring bodybuilders were studying these photos the way art students study paintings, analyzing the lines, the shadows, the poses, trying to reverse engineer the image. The camera didn't just capture bodybuilding. It taught bodybuilding what it was supposed to look like. And here's the trick. The camera lies. Not in the sense that photos are fake, but in the sense that they freeze a single moment and declare it permanent. The pump after a workout lasts 20 minutes. But the photo lasts forever. The tan hides definition flaws, but the photo makes the tan look natural. The angle makes the muscle look larger, but the photo doesn't show you the angle. So bodybuilders began training not just for size or strength, but for how they would look in a photo. They learned to flex in ways that created shadows. They learned to twist their torso to make their waist look smaller. They learned that certain muscles photograph better than others. So they prioritized those muscles even if it created imbalances. This created a strange feedback loop. Magazines published photos of bodybuilders. Aspiring bodybuilders studied those photos and trained to replicate them. The best replicators got published in magazines. The next generation studied those photos. Each generation was training to look like a photograph of someone who had trained to look like a photograph. The body became a copy of a copy of a copy, each iteration moving further from any natural or functional baseline. This wasn't evolution. This was generational drift toward a standard that existed only in print. And then the 1950s happened. The 1950s are when physique photography became an industry unto itself. Magazines like Physique Pictorial, founded by Bob Miser in 1951, pushed the visual culture to its logical extreme. These weren't training manuals. They were galleries. Page after page of muscular men in minimal clothing, pose in studios, on beaches, in nature settings. The pretext was always fitness, health, physical culture. The subtext was something the law didn't want to name, and the market was enormous. Here's what's important to understand. These magazines weren't fringe. They were mass market. Physique Pictorial alone had a circulation of over 40,000 copies per issue by the late 1950s. Massive for a niche publication. It was sold at newsstands, by mail order, in athletic stores. And its influence on bodybuilding culture was profound, because it established that the male body should be an object of sustained visual attention, not just glanced at in passing, but studied, appreciated, collected. This normalized something that had previously been uncomfortable in mainstream American culture. The idea that men could look at other men's bodies not just for comparison or competition, but for aesthetic pleasure. This made bodybuilding possible as a spectator sport. Because if no one wanted to look at muscular bodies, there would be no audience for bodybuilding contests, no market for bodybuilding photos, no economic engine to sustain the culture. The magazines created the audience before the sport formalized itself. They taught people how to look at a body the way you'd look at a sculpture, appreciating line, form, proportion, detail. By the time major bodybuilding contests started happening in the 1960s, there was already a trained audience who knew how to see what they were looking at. But photography also created the obsession, because once you see yourself in a photo, you see what everyone else sees, and it's never what you thought. You thought you looked bigger. The photo shows you smaller. You thought your arms were balanced. The photo shows one arm lagging. You thought the lighting at the gym made you look good. The photo shows every flaw the lighting was hiding. So you train harder. You diet stricter. You take another photo. And the cycle continues, because the photo will always reveal something you didn't see in the mirror. The mirror shows you emotion, in context, in forgiving light. The photo shows you frozen, isolated under interrogation. And the photo doesn't lie, except that it does, because it's just one frozen second of a body that's never the same twice. This is why bodybuilders become addicted to photos. Not because they're vain, though some are, but because the photo is the only objective record. Your memory is unreliable. Your feeling in the gym is unreliable. Other people's compliments are unreliable. But the photo is data. It shows you exactly where you are, which means it shows you exactly how far you still have to go. And if bodybuilding is about closing the gap between what you are and what you could be, the photo is a ruler that measures that gap. The problem is, the ruler keeps getting longer. Muscle Beach and the invention of the gym as pilgrimage site. Santa Monica, California, 1934. The city installs gymnastics equipment on a section of beach near the Santa Monica Pier. Rings, parallel bars, a horizontal bar. It's meant for casual recreation. Within months, acrobats, strongmen, and amateur bodybuilders are using it daily, performing stunts, training in public, attracting crowds. The area becomes known as Muscle Beach. By the 1940s, it's a weekend spectacle. Hundreds of people gather to watch men and women perform acrobatic pyramids, handstands, one-arm holds. Some performers are professional circus athletes. Some are bodybuilders who've never competed. Some are just enthusiasts who like the attention. It's free. It's outdoors. It's theater. And it accidentally invents something crucial. The idea that a place can be synonymous with a culture. Muscle Beach wasn't just a location where training happened. It was a brand, a pilgrimage site, a place you went to be seen, to see, to absorb the atmosphere. If you were serious about bodybuilding in the 1940s, you tried to make your way to Muscle Beach, not necessarily to train. There were better equipped gyms, but to be part of the scene, to say you were there, to take a photo there. The place became proof of commitment. And that idea, that a physical location could embody and legitimize a subculture, would repeat itself over and over in bodybuilding's history. But Muscle Beach also created tension, because it was public, and because it involved grown men in minimal clothing flexing for crowds. Local authorities didn't know what to make of it. Some saw it as wholesome athletic culture. Others saw it as indecent or suspicious, or a magnet for the wrong kind of attention. By 1959, after a scandal involving accusations of inappropriate behavior, the city shut down Muscle Beach. The equipment was removed, the performers scattered, but the mythology remained. And within a few years, a new Muscle Beach opened in Venice Beach, a few miles south, and that's the one that would define the culture. Venice Beach in the 1960s was different. It was grittier, less controlled, more of a genuine subculture, and less of a weekend spectacle. And crucially, it was close to Gold's Gym, which Joe Gold opened in 1965. Gold's Gym was a concrete box filled with heavy weights and minimal amenities. No air conditioning. No mirrors initially, no fancy equipment, just iron and barbells and a culture of serious lifters who didn't need comfort. It was the opposite of the athletic clubs that catered to wealthy businessmen. Gold's was for people who were there to work, not to socialize, and it became legendary. Here's why Gold's mattered. It created a physical temple, a place where the best bodybuilders in the world trained, which meant if you wanted to be great, you trained there too. Or at least, that's what the mythology said. The reality was more complicated. Plenty of great bodybuilders trained in anonymous gyms across the country and never saw Venice Beach. But the mythology mattered more than the reality, because what Gold's Gym did was turn bodybuilding into a pilgrimage culture. You didn't just train anywhere. You trained at Gold's, or you trained in a gym that aspired to be like Gold's, or you trained alone and dreamed of someday making to Gold's. The gym became the Mecca, and everyone else was a provincial believer. This geographic concentration did something strange to the sport. It meant that bodybuilding culture was now shaped by a specific place with specific people with specific ideas about what bodybuilding should be. And because Gold was in Venice Beach, and because Venice Beach was becoming a countercultural hub in the 1960s and 70s, bodybuilding absorbed some of that countercultural energy. The idea that this was an outsider pursuit, something mainstream society didn't understand or appreciate, something raw and unpolished and authentic. Gold's wasn't trying to be respectable. It was trying to be effective, and that grittiness became part of bodybuilding's identity. But Gold's also codified something darker, the idea that if you weren't willing to suffer, you weren't serious. The gym was hot. The equipment was uncomfortable. The training sessions were brutal. The unspoken rule was that comfort was for amateurs. Real bodybuilders trained in pain, trained through injury, pushed past normal human limits. This was framed as discipline, dedication, mental toughness, but it also normalized a kind of self-destruction that the sport would never fully reckon with. Because once suffering becomes proof of commitment, it's very hard to draw a line between productive intensity and dangerous excess. The Weider Machine, how two brothers build a sport to sell supplements. Montreal, 1946. Two brothers, Joe and Ben Weider, both in their 20s, create the International Federation of Bodybuilders, the IFBB. They have no money, no authority, no athletes under contract, no gyms, no international presence. What they have is ambition, publishing experience, and a plan to turn bodybuilding into a sanctioned sport so they can sell magazines and equipment to the people who participate in it. It works. Here's how the machine operated. The IFBB created the organizational structure. It sanctioned contests. It developed rules for judging, categories for competition, rankings for athletes. It gave bodybuilding the appearance of legitimacy, a governing body like the NBA or FIFA, except much smaller and entirely controlled by the Weiders. Then the Weiders launched Muscle and Fitness and Flex magazines, which cover the athletes competing in IFBB contests. Then they launched Weider Nutrition, selling protein powders and supplements that were advertised in those magazines and endorsed by athletes featured in those magazines. Then they created the Mr. Olympia contest in 1965, positioning it as bodybuilding's Super Bowl, the pinnacle event that every serious bodybuilder trained years to reach. And Mr. Olympia was, conveniently, an IFBB-sanctioned event covered extensively in Weider magazines and sponsored by Weider Nutrition. This was vertical integration, before anyone called it that. The Weiders controlled the sport, the media, the supplements, and the flagship event. If you wanted to be a professional bodybuilder, you participated in their ecosystem. You competed in IFBB contests. You read Weider magazines for training advice. You bought Weider protein. You aspired to win Mr. Olympia. Every piece fed the others, and the brothers became wealthy. But here's what this did to the sport. It turned bodybuilding into an advertisement for itself. The magazines weren't objective journalism. They were promotional material for the contests, which were promotional material for the supplements, which were promoted in the magazines. The athletes weren't just competitors. They were influencers before that word existed. Their job was to inspire people to buy into the system. Buy the magazines, buy the supplements, enter the contests, buy more supplements, train for the next level, buy more products. The sport existed to perpetuate the business, and the business existed to expand the sport. It was a closed loop that generated money at every turn. This also meant that editorial decisions in the magazines weren't about truth. They were about what would sell products. If a training method was boring but effective, it wouldn't get covered. If a training method was exciting but overhyped, it would get 5 articles. If an athlete was a champion but unmarketable, they'd get minimal coverage. If an athlete was charismatic but unproven, they'd get a cover story. The Weeders understood that bodybuilding wasn't really about who was the best. It was about who was the most compelling story. And the most compelling stories sold the most magazines, which sold the most supplements, which funded the next contest. The athletes understood this too. By the 1970s, bodybuilders knew that winning Mr. Olympia wasn't just about having the best physique. It was about being the best character in the Weeder narrative. You needed a personality, a training philosophy, a catchphrase, a look that photographed well, a willingness to promote products. The sport became as much about media performance as physical performance. And the ones who figured that out, like Arnold Schwarzenegger, became legends. The ones who didn't remain footnotes. Arnold won Mr. Olympia 7 times between 1970 and 1980. But his real genius wasn't just his physique. It was his understanding that bodybuilding was theater. He gave interviews where he compared the pump to sexual pleasure, not because it was true, but because it was memorable. He posed with confidence that bordered on arrogance, not because he was arrogant, but because confidence sold tickets. He befriended the Weeders, appeared in their magazines constantly, promoted their products enthusiastically. He understood the game. And when the documentary Pumping Iron came out in 1977, it turned him into a household name because it framed bodybuilding the way Arnold had already been framing himself, as spectacle, theater, myth. Pumping Iron was ostensibly a documentary about the 1975 Mr. Olympia contest. In reality, it was a scripted drama. Arnold played the cocky champion. Lou Ferrigno played the underdog challenger. The filmmakers created storylines, invented rivalries, staged scenes for emotional impact. It was pro wrestling in posing trunks. And it worked. The film grossed millions. It brought bodybuilding into mainstream consciousness. Gyms across America saw membership spikes. Protein powder sales exploded. The Weeders sold more magazines than ever. And Arnold transitioned from bodybuilder to actor to global celebrity. But here's the cost. Pumping Iron also codified bodybuilding as entertainment rather than sport. It established that the narrative mattered more than the accuracy. It taught a generation of bodybuilders that personality was currency, and it locked the sport into a model where the goal wasn't just to be the best. It was to be the most marketable version of the best, which meant that bodybuilding would forever be shaped not by athletic merit alone, but by what sold, the lens, the pose, and the construction of an impossible standard. Here's what most people don't realize about bodybuilding photography. Every image you see is a lie, not a malicious lie, but a constructed one. The bodybuilder has been dieting for 12 to 16 weeks to drop body fat to unsustainable levels that make them irritable, foggy, weak. They manipulated water intake to make their skin thinner and their muscles look fuller. They've just finished a workout, so their muscles are temporarily engorged with blood. They've applied oil or bronzer to their skin so it reflects light in a specific way. They're standing under carefully positioned lights that create shadows to emphasize muscle separation. They're flexing muscles that no one flexes in normal life, holding poses that hurt, making faces that convey confidence they don't feel. The photographer is shooting from angles that elongate certain proportions and hide others. They'll take 500 photos. You'll see one, and that one photo becomes a standard. That's the image that appears in magazines, on posters, in ads. That's what aspiring bodybuilders study and try to replicate. That's what judges use as a mental reference when they score competitors. That one frozen moment, which represents maybe 0.001% of that person's physical existence, becomes a definition of what a bodybuilder should look like. This is insane, but it's how the sport works. The problem compounds because the standards keep escalating. In the 1950s, a bodybuilder might compete at 180 pounds with visible abs and decent arm development. By the 1970s, Champions were 220 pounds with extreme muscle separation. By the 1990s, they were 260 pounds with vascularity that looked anatomical. Today, top competitors weigh over 290 pounds in contest condition, a size that would have been considered grotesque or impossible 40 years ago. What changed? Not human genetics. The images changed. Each generation of bodybuilders looked at photos of the previous generation and said, "I need be bigger than that." And they were. So the next generation looked at them and said, "I need to be bigger than that." And the cycle continued with no ceiling, no endpoint, no moment where everyone agreed the standard had been reached. This is called reference creep, though bodybuilding doesn't use that term. It's the same phenomenon that happens in any visual culture, where ideals are set by images rather than by function or health. The ideal isn't stable. It's always defined relative to what came before. And because bodybuilding has no functional purpose, no enemy to defeat, no weight to lift in competition, no race to finish, there's no external limit. The only limit is what the human body can be pushed to achieve, and even that limit keeps moving as pharmaceutical and nutritional science advances. Which brings us to the part no one wants to talk about directly, so they talk around it. The part where bodybuilding stopped being about maximizing natural human potential and started being about maximizing enhanced human potential. The part where every professional bodybuilder understands that competing at the highest level requires pharmaceutical assistance, but no one says it explicitly because saying it would invalidate the mythos. The mythos being, this is about discipline, hard work, genetics, and superior training. The reality being, those things matter, but they're not sufficient. Not anymore. Not if you want to win. The first anabolic steroid used widely in bodybuilding was methandrostenolone, developed in 1958 and marketed as Dianabol. By the 1960s, competitive bodybuilders were using it. By the 1970s, it was standard. By the 1980s, the protocols had expanded to include multiple compounds, stacking strategies, cycling methods. By the 1990s, the dosages and combinations would have horrified the doctors who originally prescribed these substances for medical wasting conditions. Today, professional bodybuilding operates in a space where everyone knows the truth, but no one states it explicitly, because stating it would collapse the commercial illusion that sells the supplements, the programs, the dream. This creates a grotesque situation for amateur bodybuilders. They see the photos of professionals. They train hard. They eat clean. They buy the supplements. They follow the programs. And they don't look anything like the photos. So they assume they're doing something wrong. They're not training hard enough, not eating clean enough, not using the right program. They buy more products. They train harder. They get frustrated. Some quit. Some injure themselves. And some cross the line into pharmaceutical enhancement, often without medical supervision, because the gap between their body and the photos is unbridgeable through training alone. And here's the cruelest part. Even with pharmaceutical assistance, most people still won't look like the photos. Because the photos represent genetic outliers who've trained for decades under professional coaching with professional nutrition and pharmaceutical protocols that are both expensive and dangerous. The photos aren't realistic even for enhanced athletes. They're the peak of the peak, the 0.01%, but they're presented as the standard. And the standard sells magazines, supplements, gym memberships, coaching programs, dreams. The standard is the product. And the product requires you to believe it achievable if you just try hard enough. The psychology of the mirror. Why bodybuilders never see what they build. Here's a strange fact. Bodybuilders often have worse body image than sedentary people. Not always, but often enough that researchers have given a name, muscle dysmorphia. It's a form of body dysmorphic disorder where people perceive themselves as smaller and weaker than they actually are. A man who's 220 pounds of muscle looks in the mirror and sees someone who's small. A man with 18-inch arms thinks his arms are average. A man who's objectively in the top 1% of muscular development feels inadequate standing next to someone in the top 0.1%. The disorder was first clinically described in 1993 when researchers studying male bodybuilders noticed that many exhibited symptoms similar to anorexia nervosa, obsessive preoccupation with body size, compulsive behavior around diet and training, distorted self-perception, Extreme anxiety about being seen as inadequate, except instead of fearing being fat, they fear being small. The condition is sometimes called reverse anorexia or bigorexia, though those terms are informal. The clinical term is muscle dysmorphia, and it's classified as a subtype of body dysmorphic disorder. People with muscle dysmorphia spend hours per day thinking about their muscularity. They train even when injured. They cancel social events to avoid missing workouts. They avoid situations where their body might be seen as inadequate, like swimming or intimate relationships. They use mirrors compulsively, checking their appearance dozens of times per day. But they never see improvement. Every glance confirms their fear. They're not big enough, not lean enough, not good enough. And here's why bodybuilding creates this. Because bodybuilding is the only pursuit where the goal is visible on your body, but your perception of your body is unreliable. If you're learning piano, you can hear your progress. If you're learning chess, you can track your rating. If you're running marathons, you have your times. But in bodybuilding, your progress is judged by how you look, and how you look is filtered through your own psychology, your current mood, the lighting, the time of day, whether you've eaten, whether you just trained, whether you're comparing yourself to someone else. The mirror doesn't show you objective reality. It shows you your insecurity. This is compounded by something called reference point adaptation. When you first start training, gaining 10 pounds of muscle is dramatic. You look different. You feel different. People comment. But once you've gained that 10 pounds, it becomes your new baseline. You adapt to it. You stop seeing it as an achievement and start seeing it as your starting point. So the next 10 pounds has to happen for you to feel like you're making progress. Except once you gain that 10 pounds, you adapt again. The goalpost moves. The satisfaction is temporary, and the dissatisfaction is permanent, because you're always comparing yourself to a future version of yourself that doesn't exist yet. Bodybuilders also suffer from what researchers call upward comparison bias. They don't compare themselves to average people. They compare themselves to other bodybuilders. And specifically, they compare themselves to the best bodybuilders they can see. The photos in magazines, the champions on stage, the genetic elite at Gold's Gym. This creates a distorted reference point where anything less than exceptional feels like failure. A normal person looks at a bodybuilder and thinks, "That's impressive." The bodybuilder looks at himself and thinks, "I'm not as big as Ronnie Coleman." Both perceptions are accurate, but only one causes suffering. There's also the psychological trap of the pump. The pump is a temporary swelling of muscles during and immediately after training, caused by increased blood flow. It makes you look bigger, feel tighter, see more definition. For about 20 minutes, you look like your ideal self. Then the pump fades. Your muscles return to their normal size. And every time this happens, it reinforces a belief that your normal state is inadequate. You spend 23 hours and 40 minutes per day looking normal and 20 minutes looking good. Your brain starts to believe that good is what you should look like all the time and normal is failure. So you chase the pump. You train more frequently. You take supplements designed to increase the pump. You time your photos for immediately post-workout. And you feel deflated literally every time the pump fades. This is why bodybuilding can be psychologically dangerous even when it's physically healthy. The sport is designed around a feedback loop that generates perpetual dissatisfaction. You set a goal. You achieve it. You adapt to it. You set a new goal. You achieve it. You adapt to it. There's no finish line. No point at which you can say, "I'm done. I'm satisfied. This is enough." Because enough is always defined relative to where you currently are, and where you currently are always feels inadequate once you've been there for a while. The sport trains you to be unsatisfied. And for some people, that training becomes permanent. But here's the paradox. For many bodybuilders, the sport is also psychologically redemptive. It gives them structure, purpose, a sense of control in a chaotic world. It builds confidence through visible, earned progress. It creates community. It provides a ritual that feels meaningful. The gym becomes a sanctuary. The routine becomes an anchor. The progress becomes proof that effort matters, that discipline works, that you can change yourself through sustained will. For people who feel powerless in other areas of life, career, relationships, family, status, bodybuilding offers a domain where power is achievable. You can't control whether you get promoted, but you can control whether you show up to the gym. You can't control how others perceive you, but you can control how much weight you lift. The body becomes the one variable you can govern, and for some people, that's salvation. So the same activity that creates muscle dysmorphia in some people creates psychological resilience in others. The difference isn't the activity. It's the person. It's their baseline mental health. It's their relationship with control. It's whether they're using bodybuilding as a tool for self-improvement or as a solution to deeper insecurity. And the sport doesn't distinguish between these groups. It welcomes everyone. It promises transformation to everyone. And for some, that promise is fulfilled. For others, it becomes a trap. The sport doesn't know which group you're in until you're already years deep. The economics of dissatisfaction. How bodybuilding became an industry by making you feel incomplete. Here's how much money flows through bodybuilding's ecosystem annually. The global gym and health club industry is worth approximately $96 billion. The sports nutrition supplement industry, protein powders, pre-workouts, amino acids, creatine, fat burners, is worth $45 billion and growing at 8% per year. The fitness apparel market is worth $353 billion. The personal training industry is worth $12 billion. The online fitness coaching and programming market is worth $6 billion. And these numbers don't include ancillary industries, meal prep services, bodybuilding contest fees, posing coaching, tanning services, pharmaceutical markets, testosterone replacement clinics. Conservatively, bodybuilding adjacent industries generate over $500 billion annually. And every dollar that depends on people believing their bodies aren't good enough yet. This isn't cynical observation. It's structural design. The industry exists because it identified a renewable resource, human insecurity, and it learned how to harvest that resource perpetually by creating a simple equation. You're not where you want to be. We have a product that closes that gap by the product. Notice you're still not where you want to be. We have another product. The equation never resolves because the goalpost is designed to move. Get bigger becomes get leaner. Get leaner becomes get more muscular. Get more muscular becomes get more symmetrical. Get more symmetrical becomes get more vascular. Every achievement creates a new inadequacy. Every solution creates a new problem. And every problem has a product attached to it. Let's trace one person's journey through the system. You're a 22-year-old man who decides to start lifting weights. You join a gym, $50 per month. You buy a beginner program online, $30. You buy the recommended supplements, protein powder, creatine, a multivitamin, $100 per month. For 6 months, you follow the program. You gain 15 pounds. You feel good. Then you plateau. The program stops working. So you buy an intermediate program, $75. You upgrade your supplements, pre-workout, BCAAs, glutamine, now $150 per month. You buy lifting shoes, a belt, wrist wraps, $200. You start watching bodybuilding YouTube channels that recommend specific brands. You switch to those brands. 6 months later, you plateau again. Now you're reading forums. Everyone says you need a coach. You hire an online coach, $200 per month. The coach prescribes a new program, new macros, new supplements. You buy a food scale, meal prep containers, a new gym bag, $150. You follow the plan. You gain 10 more pounds. You start competing in local shows. Entry fees are $150 per show. Posing trunks are $80. Spray tan is $100. Contest prep coaching is $400 per month for 16 weeks, $6 for 100. And you're still natural. You're 3 years in, you spent over $20,000, and you're nowhere near the pro level. This is a moderate path. The expensive path involves pharmaceutical enhancement, which adds $200 to $2,000 per month depending on the protocol. It involves specialized blood work every few months, $300 per test. It involves preventative health measures, liver support supplements, cardiovascular medication, aromatase inhibitors, another $200 per month. Some bodybuilders spend $30,000 to $50,000 annually on their pursuit. And for what? For most, not prize money. Local and regional shows pay little or nothing. Not fame. 99% of competitors are unknown outside their gym. Not career advancement. Bodybuilding is a money pit, not a moneymaker, for everyone except the top 0.1%. They do it because they're chasing something the industry has taught them to chase. The perfect version of themselves, which always exists one product away. The supplement industry is especially insidious because it operates in a regulatory gray zone. In the United States, supplements aren't regulated by the FDA the same way drugs are. Companies can make claims that are technically legal but scientifically dubious. Supports muscle growth. Enhances recovery. Boosts testosterone naturally. None of these claims have to be proven. They just can't be explicitly false. So the industry floods a market with products that might work marginally, or might work via placebo, or might not work at all. But they're packaged in aggressive branding, words like anabolic in nuclear and mutant in bold letters. So they feel powerful. And they're endorsed by bodybuilders whose physiques were built through years of training and often pharmaceutical assistance, not through the supplements they're promoting. Here's what actually works for building muscle, according to decades of research. Progressive resistance training, adequate protein intake, roughly 1 gram per pound of body weight, sufficient calories, adequate sleep, and consistency over months and years. That's it. Protein powder helps if you struggle to eat enough protein through food, which many people do. So it has utility. Creatine monohydrate is one of the most well-researched supplements in existence and demonstrably aids strength and muscle gain. It's legitimate. Everything else? The pre-workouts, the intra-workouts, the post-workouts, the BCAAs, the glutamine, the nitric oxide boosters, the testosterone boosters, the fat burners? Most are either minimally effective or entirely useless. But they sell because they promise an edge, and bodybuilding culture is built on the belief that edges matter. And maybe they do at the elite level. When you're competing for Mr. Olympia, a 1% improvement might be the difference between first and fourth place. But for the 99.99% of people who will never compete professionally, these products are just expensive placebos that reinforce the idea that transformation comes from purchasing rather than from doing. The industry prefers this arrangement because it's more profitable to sell ongoing consumption than to sell one-time education. If you could buy a book for $20 that told you everything you needed to know, train hard, eat enough protein, sleep well, be patient, the industry would collapse. So instead, the industry sells complexity. It sells proprietary blends, advanced protocols, cutting-edge formulas, insider secrets. It creates an illusion that progress requires constant purchasing. And for many people, that illusion is convincing enough that they spend decades buying products instead of just doing the work. The online coaching industry operates similarly. There are legitimate coaches who provide value, personalized programming, accountability, feedback, education. But the industry has also flooded with coaches whose only qualification is that they're lean or muscular. They sell cookie-cutter programs disguised as personalized coaching. They copy programming from textbooks and rebrand it. They charge $200 to $500 per month to send you a spreadsheet and check in once a week. And because they look the part, people assume they know what they're doing. Some do, many don't. But the market doesn't care because the market isn't buying expertise. It's buying hope. The hope that this coach, this program, this supplement stack will finally be the thing that works. And when it doesn't, the blame falls on the customer. You weren't consistent enough. You didn't follow the protocol exactly. Your genetics aren't ideal. Never. The product was oversold. This is how the industry protects itself from accountability. It externalizes failure. If you didn't get results, it's because you didn't try hard enough, or you have bad genetics, or you didn't buy the premium version of the program. The product is never the problem. And because bodybuilding is inherently difficult, muscle growth is slow, fat loss is uncomfortable, genetics do matter. It's easy to believe that the failure is yours, so you buy the next product, and the next, and the industry thanks you for your continued patronage. The Golden Age myth. Why we romanticize an era that was harder, poorer, and less safe. There's a recurring pattern in bodybuilding culture. Nostalgia for the 1970s. The Golden Era, they call it. The era of Arnold Franco, Frank Zane, Lou Ferrigno. The era when bodybuilders trained at Gold's Gym in Venice Beach. When the sport was pure, when aesthetics mattered more than mass. When the community was real and the physiques were more human. This nostalgia is everywhere. YouTube videos, forum discussions, magazine retrospectives. The implicit message, things were better then. The sport has lost something. We need to return to the principles of the Golden Era. Here's what they don't tell you about the Golden Era. Most bodybuilders were broke. Prize money was minimal. $1,000 for winning a major contest. Maybe $3,000 for Mr. Olympia, if you were lucky. There were no supplement sponsorships worth mentioning. No online coaching. No social media brand deals. Most bodybuilders worked blue-collar jobs to pay rent. Construction, bricklaying, gym training for hourly wages. Arnold was an anomaly because he figured out mail-order business and real estate early. Most of his peers struggled financially their entire careers. Franco Columbu worked as a bricklayer and a chiropractor. Frank Zane was a high school teacher. The glory was mostly in retrospect. The training was also less scientific. There was no internet, no YouTube tutorials, no exercise databases with biomechanical analysis. You learn by watching other bodybuilders, by trial and error, by asking the biggest guy in the gym. Sometimes that worked. Sometimes it led to decades of inefficient training or chronic injuries that were never properly diagnosed. The purity of the era was partly just lack of information, and the community, while real, was also insular and often exclusionary. Gold's Gym was a scene, which meant it had hierarchies, politics, egos. If you weren't part of the inner circle, you trained in the back and kept your head down. The physiques were also enhanced. The myth is that Golden Era bodybuilders were more natural or used smaller doses, or were somehow less pharmaceutical than modern bodybuilders. This is false. They used what was available at the time, primarily dianabol and testosterone, sometimes decadurabolin. The doses were lower than modern protocols, not because of ethical restraint, but because the drugs were harder to obtain and the knowledge of how to use them was less developed. But make no mistake, the top bodybuilders of the 1970s were not natural. The aesthetics were different, smaller waist, less extreme mass, but that was partly genetics and partly the limits of 1970s pharmaceutical access, not some moral high ground. So why do people romanticize this era? Because nostalgia is always about the present, not the past. When people say they miss the Golden Era, what they're really saying is, I'm dissatisfied with modern bodybuilding. They're dissatisfied with the extreme mass, the distended guts, the bubble guts and insulin bloat that make modern bodybuilders look pregnant, the judging that rewards size over aesthetics, the lack of personality in a sport that's become more corporate and less countercultural, the disappearance of the local gym culture in favor of influencer culture. These are real criticisms. Modern bodybuilding does have problems, but the solution isn't to return to the 1970s. It's to acknowledge that every era has trade-offs. The Golden Era had better aesthetics, arguably, but it also had worse science, worse safety, worse financial viability, and fewer opportunities for anyone who wasn't a white man training in California. The modern era has better information, better nutrition, more diversity in who can participate, and more ways to monetize the pursuit. But it's also more pharmaceutical, more extreme, more algorithmic, more commercial. Neither era is pure. Both have virtues and vices. The nostalgia is understandable, but it's also a fantasy. And like all fantasies, it's more useful as a critique of the present than as a blueprint for the future. What's really driving the nostalgia is a feeling that bodybuilding has lost its soul, that it's become too corporate, too fake, too influenced by money and social media, that the physiques have become grotesque rather than aspirational, that the community has fragmented into influencer cults and online tribes, that the sport judges the wrong things and rewards the wrong people. These are emotional responses to real changes, but framing it as the Golden Era was better misses the point. The point is, What do we want bodybuilding to be going forward? And the answer to that question can't be found in 1975. It has to be built now, with the tools and knowledge we have now, by people who are honest about the costs and benefits of the pursuit. The judging problem. How subjectivity turned a sport into a politics. Here's the structural flaw at the center of bodybuilding. It's a sport where the winner is decided by opinion. Not time on a clock, not weight on a bar, not points on a board. Opinion. 5 to 7 judges look at bodies on stage and decide which one is best according to criteria that are vague, shifting, and influenced by trends. The official criteria are symmetry, proportion, muscular development, conditioning, and presentation. But what does best symmetry mean when you're comparing a 250-pound mass monster to a 210-pound aesthetic physique? What does best proportion mean when judging standards have changed every decade? How do you objectively score presentation when one judge thinks confidence is attractive and another thinks it's arrogance? You can't. So judging becomes subjective, and subjectivity breeds politics. Judges have favorites. Promoters have business relationships with certain athletes. Supplement companies that sponsor the contest want their athletes to win. Judges know which athletes are friendly with the federation, which ones have caused trouble, which ones sell tickets. And all of this influences scoring, consciously or unconsciously. A bodybuilder can do everything right, train for years, sacrifice everything, show up in the best shape of his life, and still lose because a judge decided his structure wasn't aesthetic enough, or his posing was too aggressive, or the federation wanted to push a different athlete as the new face of the sport. This creates a sport that feels rigged. Not always, not in every contest, but often enough that competitors talk about it constantly. The show was political. The judges had already decided. They wanted the other guy to win. Sometimes these complaints are sour grapes. Sometimes they're accurate. The problem is, there's no way to prove it either way, because the judging criteria are too vague to be legally challenged. A judge can score you lower and simply say, "I thought the other competitor had better proportions." What does that mean? Nothing specific. Everything general. It's unfalsifiable. This subjectivity also means that bodybuilding trends dictate winners rather than objective progress. In the 1970s, judges rewarded aesthetic physiques with small waists and classic lines. Think Frank Zane. In the 1980s, they rewarded mass. Think Lee Haney. In the 1990s, they rewarded mass with conditioning. Think Dorian Yates. In the 2000s, they rewarded mass with freaky details. Think Ronnie Coleman. In the 2010s, they started penalizing extreme mass because the physiques were becoming grotesque: distended guts, bubble bellies, loss of the V-taper. So the pendulum swung back toward aesthetic physiques, though still at 240-plus pounds, which would have been considered massive in earlier eras. The goalposts moved constantly, and bodybuilders had to move with them or become obsolete. This creates an arms race with no finish line. If the judges reward mass, bodybuilders get more massive. If the judges then penalize mass, bodybuilders have to reduce size while maintaining conditioning, which requires different drugs, different training, different nutrition. If judges reward conditioning, bodybuilders diet harder, which makes them smaller, so they compensate by using more drugs to maintain size while getting leaner. Every shift in judging standards creates a new pharmaceutical and training arms race. And because the standards are set by subjective opinion rather than objective measurement, no one knows when to stop. There's no number you're aiming for. There's only better than last year and better than the competition. Both of those targets are infinite. The athletes know this, and some refuse to compete because of it. They train for themselves, post on social media, build online businesses, and skip the stage entirely. Why subject yourself to subjective judging when you can build a brand based on your own aesthetics, your own principles, your own definition of success? This is the rise of influencer bodybuilders. People who have the physiques, the followings, the income, but never compete, or compete once for credibility and then quit. They realize that the contest stage is a bottleneck controlled by judges and federations, and that bypassing that bottleneck gives them more freedom, more money, and less stress. But this also fragments the sport. When the top physiques aren't competing, the contests lose legitimacy. When influencers are making more money than champions, the hierarchy collapses. When success is measured by Instagram followers rather than trophies, the sport becomes indistinguishable from entertainment. And maybe that's fine. Maybe bodybuilding was always entertainment disguised as sport. Maybe the judging problem is just the sport admitting what it's always been, a beauty pageant with muscles. But if that's true, then the athletes need to stop pretending they're doing something objective and start being honest about what they're actually doing, performing for applause, building a brand, chasing a look that sells. Identity in the iron. Why people build bodies that don't need to exist. Here's the question that haunts bodybuilding. Why would someone spend years training for a body that serves no practical function? A sprinter trains to run fast, which is useful. A powerlifter trains to lift heavy, which is measurable. A bodybuilder trains to look a certain way, which is what? What does that accomplish? You're not stronger than a powerlifter. You're not faster than a sprinter. You're not healthier than a recreational athlete. You're just more muscular. So what's the point? The answer is never physical. It's always psychological. Bodybuilding is a technology for manufacturing identity. In a world where most people feel interchangeable, same jobs, same clothes, same routines, same suburban houses, same anxieties, the body becomes one of the few things you can control and customize. You can't easily change your personality. You can't redesign your face without surgery. You can't grow taller, but you can build muscle. You can transform your body in ways that are visible, measurable, and entirely self-authored. And once you do, that transformation becomes who you are. This is why bodybuilders describe training as identity rather than hobby. It's not something they do. It's something they are. I'm a bodybuilder is a different sentence than I do bodybuilding. The first is ontological. It describes being. The second is just activity. And people who get deep into bodybuilding eventually cross that line. They stop being people who train and become people whose identity is inseparable from training. Their social circle is the gym. Their schedule revolves around meals and workouts. Their self-worth is tied to their appearance. Their sense of purpose is built around incremental physical improvement. The body becomes the project, and the project becomes the self. This can be healthy. For people who feel lost, aimless, uncertain, bodybuilding provides structure. It gives you something to wake up for. It creates measurable goals when other parts of life feel chaotic or meaningless. It builds discipline. Because you can't fake in the gym. You either show up and do the work or you don't, and the results reflect that. It creates community. Because gyms are tribal spaces where people bond over shared suffering and mutual respect. It builds confidence because you can see yourself changing, improving, becoming more than you were. And for people who felt powerless in other domains, career, relationships, social status, the gym is a place where power is achievable through effort alone. But it can also become a cage. Because once your identity is tied to your body, any threat to your body becomes a threat to yourself. An injury isn't just physical, it's existential. A week off training isn't just rest, it's identity loss. Aging isn't just natural decline, it's death of who you are. And once you're in that headspace, it's very hard to get out. Because letting go of the body means letting go of the identity, which means letting go of the structure, community, purpose, and self-worth that came with it. So you don't let go. You train through injuries. You ignore signs of overtraining. You keep pushing when your body is asking you to stop. Because stopping means admitting that the thing you built your life around might not last forever. And that's unbearable. This is why bodybuilding can be simultaneously the best and worst thing in someone's life. It depends entirely on why they're doing it. If they're doing it to become someone they respect, it's healthy. If they're doing it to escape someone they hate, it's dangerous. If it's an addition to their identity, it's enriching. If it's a replacement for their identity, it's fragile. The problem is bodybuilding doesn't distinguish between these motivations. It accepts everyone. It rewards intensity regardless of whether that intensity is coming from self-love or self-loathing. And by the time you realize which one is driving you, you're often years deep and structurally dependent on the routine. There's also the issue of comparison. Bodybuilding culture is built on hierarchy. The biggest, leanest, most developed physiques are at the top. Everyone else is ranked below. And because the culture is visual, the hierarchy is always visible. You walk into the gym and immediately know where you stand relative to everyone else. You scroll Instagram and immediately know where you stand relative to influencers and pros. This constant comparison can be motivating, but it can also be corrosive. Because no matter how much you improve, there's always someone bigger, leaner, more genetically gifted, more willing to push boundaries. The hierarchy is infinite, and if your self-worth is derived from where you rank, you'll never be satisfied, because you'll never be at the top. This is especially true in the age of social media, where the comparison pool isn't your local gym, it's the entire world. You're not comparing yourself to the 30 people at your gym. You're comparing yourself to the top 0.001% of physiques on the planet, curated and filtered, and presented in the best possible light. And your brain treats that as a standard. So even if you're objectively impressive, bigger and leaner than 95% of people who train, you feel average, because the 5% you're seeing online are the only reference point you're using. This warps perception. It makes progress feel insufficient. It turns bodybuilding into a pursuit where the goalposts are always set by people you'll never meet, who have genetic advantages you'll never have, who are using methods you're not willing to use, and who are presenting a version of themselves that doesn't exist 95% of the time. But here's the counterargument, and it matters. For some people, bodybuilding is a thing that saves them. It gives young men a place to channel aggression and insecurity into something productive. It gives people recovering from trauma a way to rebuild a sense of agency and control. It gives people struggling with depression a routine that forces them out of bed. It gives socially awkward people a community where effort matters more than charm. It gives people who feel invisible a way to be seen. And for all its flaws, the gym is one of the few places in modern life where you can show up as a complete beginner, work hard, and earn respect over time regardless of your background, wealth, or social status. That matters. That's rare. And for people who need it, that's everything. The masculinity problem. How bodybuilding became a proxy for anxiety about being a man. Here's the uncomfortable part. Bodybuilding's explosion in the 20th century coincides almost exactly with the erosion of traditional masculine roles. Farm work declined. Factory work automated. Military service became less universal. Physical dominance stopped being socially necessary. Office jobs proliferated. Service economies grew. By the 1950s, millions of men were doing work that didn't require physical strength, didn't involve visible output, and didn't provide clear markers of masculine competence. You couldn't point to a field you plowed or a house you built. You filed reports. You attended meetings. You did abstract labor for abstract rewards. And this created a crisis. Not a crisis anyone talked about explicitly, but a crisis felt at the level of identity. If masculinity was traditionally defined by physical capability, strength, endurance, the ability to protect and provide through bodily power, then what happens when those capabilities are no longer required? What happens when your body becomes optional? When machines are stronger than you? When the economy doesn't reward you for being tough? When social hierarchies are determined by credentials, connections, and verbal intelligence rather than who can lift the most or fight the best? You could argue that this is progress, that masculinity should evolve beyond physical dominance, that men should derive identity from emotional intelligence, creativity, caregiving, intellectual achievement. And many men did, but many others felt unmoored. They didn't know how to be men in a world that didn't need their bodies. So they went to the gym, and they built those bodies anyway, even though no one needed them to, because the alternative, accepting that physical capability didn't matter, felt like accepting irrelevance. This is why bodybuilding became a proxy for masculinity itself. A muscular body was proof you still had what mattered, even if society didn't need it anymore. It was a visible marker of discipline, self-control, capability, and dominance, all traditionally masculine traits, that you could carry with you into a world that had stopped asking for them. You couldn't prove you were a man by hunting or farming or fighting anymore, but you could prove it by walking into a room with 18-inch arms and a 45-inch chest. The body became the resume, and unlike actual resumes, which listed accomplishments that could be questioned or diminished, the body was undeniable. It was evidence you carried on your frame. This is also why bodybuilding became inseparable from male insecurity, because it's not confident men who obsess over their muscles. It's men who are trying to build confidence. It's men who feel weak and want to feel strong. Men who feel invisible and want to be seen. Men who feel inadequate and want to be impressive. The muscular body is compensation. Not always, not for everyone, but often. And the sport knows this and markets directly to it. Every ad for supplements, every transformation program, every motivational video is aimed at the same fear. You're not enough, but you could be if you tried, if you bought this, if you committed. And the fear is real, because modern masculinity is genuinely confusing. Traditional masculine roles have collapsed, but no clear replacement has emerged. Men are told to be strong, but not aggressive, confident but not arrogant, providers but not breadwinners, emotionally available but not weak. The standards are contradictory, shifting, impossible to satisfy. So some men retreat into the gym, where the rules are clear and the results are measurable. You lift heavy things. You get bigger. You become more capable. It's simple. It's unambiguous. And in a world where nothing else feels unambiguous, that simplicity is seductive, but it's also limiting, because the body can't solve the problems that created the insecurity. You can build the biggest arms in a room and still feel inadequate in social situations. You can have abs and still struggle in relationships. You can be strong and still feel powerless at work. The body is a tool, not a solution. And confusing the two leads to a lifetime of chasing physical transformation while ignoring the psychological wounds that made you start chasing in the first place. There's also the homoerotic dimension, which bodybuilding has always danced around but never fully acknowledged. Male bodybuilding is, structurally, a performance of male beauty for a predominantly male audience. Men pose in minimal clothing under lights, while other men judge their aesthetics. Men spend hours looking at photos of other men's bodies, analyzing their proportions, admiring their development. Men attend contests to watch other men display their physiques. The entire culture revolves around men looking at men. And yet, the culture insists it's heterosexual. The bodybuilder isn't performing beauty. He's performing power. The audience isn't admiring aesthetics. They're evaluating technique. The photos aren't erotic, they're educational. This dissonance is deliberate, because acknowledging the homoerotic element would threaten the masculine identity the sport is built on. If bodybuilding is about men appreciating men's bodies, it becomes suspect. If it's about men building strength and discipline, it stays safe. So the culture codes everything as aspiration rather than desire, as respect rather than attraction, as technical analysis rather than aesthetic pleasure. And for most participants, that framing is probably accurate. But the fact that the framing is necessary, that bodybuilding constantly has to reassert its heterosexual intentions, suggests that the ambiguity is always there, just beneath the surface. This isn't a criticism, it's an observation. Bodybuilding's relationship with masculinity is complicated because masculinity itself is complicated. The sport exists in the gap between what men are told they should be and what they feel they actually are. It's simultaneously a rejection of modern masculinity's ambiguity and an embrace of it. It's a way to build a clear, visible, undeniable form of masculine identity in a world that doesn't reward that identity the way it used to. And whether that empowering or tragic depends entirely on the person doing it and why. The science underneath, why bodybuilding actually works, and why it hooks you. Here's what the research says about why muscle grows. Mechanical tension is the primary driver. When a muscle produces force under load, when it contracts against resistance, it creates microscopic damage to the muscle fibers. The body responds by repairing that damage and slightly overbuilding the tissue to handle future stress. This is hypertrophy. It's not magic, it's adaptation. The body is responding to environmental demands by becoming more capable of meeting those demands. You stress the muscle adapts. You stress it again. It adapts again. Over months and years, this accumulates into visible size. Volume matters. Volume means total work, sets, reps, weight. You need enough volume to create the stimulus for growth, but not so much that recovery becomes impossible. The sweet spot varies by person, but for most people it's somewhere between 10 and 20 hard sets per muscle group per week. Hard, meaning close to failure, where the last few reps are difficult and require genuine effort. This is why people who train casually don't see dramatic results. They're not pushing hard enough to create the stimulus. They're staying in the comfort zone, which is great for health but insufficient for hypertrophy. Progressive overload is essential. Progressive overload means gradually increasing demands placed on the muscle. More weight, more reps, more sets, more frequency, less rest. Without progression, the muscle has no reason to adapt. You lift the same weight for the same reps for months, and your body says, I'm already strong enough for this. No need to change. The progression doesn't have to be dramatic. Adding 5 pounds of bar every few weeks is enough, but it has to exist. This is why programs work initially and then stop working. They provide progression until you plateau, and then they don't. Nutrition is a foundation. You need adequate protein, roughly 0.7 to 1 gram per pound of body weight, to supply the building blocks for muscle repair. You need adequate calories to fuel recovery and growth. You need micronutrients to support metabolic processes. You need hydration. You need sleep. This isn't complicated, but it is non-negotiable. You can't out-train a bad diet. The muscle grows during recovery, not during the workout. The workout creates the stimulus. The recovery creates the adaptation. If you're not eating enough or sleeping enough, the adaptation doesn't happen. And here's why it's addictive. Because it works. Not always, not immediately, not infinitely. But for most people, if they follow a reasonable program, eat enough protein, sleep enough, and train consistently for 6 months, they will see visible change. Their arms will grow. Their chest will fill out. Their back will widen. They'll get compliments. They'll feel stronger. They'll lift weights that felt impossible 3 months ago. This creates a feedback loop. Effort, result, motivation. More effort, more result. The gym becomes rewarding in a way that most pursuits aren't, because the reward is both internal. You feel better, stronger, more capable, and external. People notice, comment, treat you differently. There's also the neurological component. Training releases endorphins, which reduce pain perception and create a mild euphoria. It reduces cortisol, which lowers stress. It improves insulin sensitivity, which stabilizes energy. It increases dopamine, which enhances focus and motivation. These aren't just psychological benefits. They're biochemical. Your brain literally functions better when you train regularly. So the gym doesn't just change your body. It changes your mental state. And once your brain associates the gym with feeling better, it starts craving it. This is why people say they're addicted to lifting. It's not entirely metaphorical. The activity is triggering reward pathways. The pump is part of this. The pump is a temporary swelling of muscles during training, caused by blood and metabolic byproducts accumulating in the tissue. It feels tight, full, and gorged. It makes you look bigger for 15 to 30 minutes. And it feels good. Physically pleasurable in a way that's hard to describe if you haven't experienced it. Bodybuilders chase the pump because it's both feedback, you're doing the exercise correctly, and reward, you temporarily look like your goal physique. Some bodybuilders describe it as better than sex, which sounds ridiculous until you consider that sex is also a blood flow-mediated pleasurable sensation involving temporary swelling of tissue. The pump is a legal, repeatable, self-induced physical high. And once you've felt it, you understand why people keep coming back. But the science also explains why bodybuilding eventually stops working as well as it did initially. Early gains are largely neurological. Your nervous system gets better at recruiting muscle fibers, so you get stronger fast. This feels like rapid progress. But after 6 to 12 months, those neurological gains plateau, and further progress depends on actual hypertrophy, which is much slower. Adding a pound of muscle per month is considered excellent progress for a trained individual. Most people add closer to a half pound per month, and at the advanced level, you're talking about a few pounds per year. This is why bodybuilders often feel like they're spinning their wheels. They are relative to their initial progress. The curve flattens. The effort required to make progress increases exponentially, while the progress itself becomes marginal. This is also why people turn to pharmaceutical enhancement, because the science shows that certain compounds, anabolic steroids, growth hormone, insulin, thyroid hormones, can push the body past its natural limits. They increase protein synthesis, reduce muscle breakdown, enhance recovery, allow for higher training volumes, and enable muscle growth that would be impossible naturally. The gains aren't infinite, but they're significant. A natural bodybuilder might build 30 to 40 pounds of muscle over a decade of optimal training. An enhanced bodybuilder can build that in 3 years. And at the elite level, where everyone is enhanced, the question becomes who's willing to push the protocols furthest. But the science also explains the costs. Exogenous hormones suppress natural hormone production, which can lead to permanent shutdown of testosterone production if not managed carefully. They strain the cardiovascular system, increasing blood pressure, thickening the left ventricle of the heart, raising hematocrit, worsening cholesterol profiles. They stress the liver and kidneys. They increase risk of stroke, heart attack, organ failure. They alter mood, sometimes creating aggression or depression or emotional instability. And because these compounds are typically used in doses far exceeding medical protocols, the risks compound. This is why retired bodybuilders often have serious health issues in their 40s and 50s. The body can tolerate extreme stress for a while, but not forever. So the science of bodybuilding is this. It works, but with diminishing returns. It's rewarding, but the reward decreases over time. It's achievable naturally, but limited. It's achievable beyond natural limits, but at significant risk. And understanding this doesn't make people quit. It just makes them more informed about what they're trading. Because ultimately, bodybuilding isn't about science. It's about what you're willing to exchange for the body you want. Time, money, comfort, health, social life. And for some people, that trade is worth it. For others, it's not. The science just shows you what's on both sides of the equation. The dark mirror. Why bodybuilding should never have existed. Here's the argument against bodybuilding, stated plainly. It creates permanent dissatisfaction in pursuit of a standard that doesn't exist outside of photos and stage lights. It industrializes insecurity by convincing people their natural bodies are inadequate. It prioritizes aesthetics over health, often sacrificing long-term well-being for short-term appearance. It normalizes extreme behaviors, starvation-level dieting, training through injury, pharmaceutical use without medical oversight, and frames those behaviors as discipline rather than dysfunction. It rewards genetic outliers and punishes everyone else, creating a hierarchy where 99% of participants will always feel they're failing. It promotes body dysmorphia by making the mirror a courtroom where you're always guilty. It turns exercise, which should be a tool for health, into a tool for self-criticism. And it does all of this while pretending to be about self-improvement. This isn't speculation. This is documented. The research on muscle dysmorphia shows that bodybuilders have higher rates of body dissatisfaction than non-lifters. The research on eating disorders shows that bodybuilders exhibit disordered eating patterns at rates comparable to anorexia populations. Rigid food rules, fear of certain foods, obsessive calorie tracking, binge restrict cycles during bulking and cutting phases. The research on steroid use shows that a significant percentage of competitive bodybuilders experience psychological dependence, withdrawal symptoms, and long-term health consequences. The research on injury rates shows that bodybuilders have high rates of chronic joint pain, tendon issues, and structural damage from years of repetitive loading. And for what? For a body that serves no function. A body that makes everyday tasks harder, fitting into airplane seats, finding clothes that fit, moving comfortably, sleeping without joint pain. A body that requires constant maintenance. You can't take a month off without losing size. You can't eat freely without gaining fat. You can't age gracefully because the body you've built is incompatible with aging. A body that exists only to be looked at, judged, compared. A body that's a product, a performance, a brand, but not a tool for living. The economic critique is even harsher. Bodybuilding exists because it's profitable to make people feel inadequate. The entire industry, gyms, supplements, coaching, contest media, depends on convincing people that their bodies are projects requiring constant investment. The ideal is designed to be unreachable, so the purchasing never stops. The transformation is designed to be temporary, so the customer keeps coming back. The science is distorted to sell products that don't work. The athletes are enhanced but sell natural programs. The photos are edited but presented as achievable. The entire system is a con where the product is hope, and the hope is designed to disappoint. So you buy more hope. And the social critique is maybe the darkest. Bodybuilding takes male insecurity about power, status, capability, relevance, and channels it into a pursuit that's socially acceptable but psychologically corrosive. It lets men feel like they're working on themselves when really they're avoiding deeper questions about identity, purpose, relationships, meaning. It gives them a thing to control when they can't control the rest of their lives. It provides a hierarchy where they can rank themselves when the rest of the world's hierarchies feel inaccessible. It offers certainty in an uncertain world. But it's a false certainty because the goalpost moves, the standards shift, the body ages, the injuries accumulate, and eventually everyone faces the same reality. The body you built doesn't solve the problems that made you start building it. So why does bodybuilding exist? Because it sells, because it fills a void, because it gives people something to do with their anxiety, because it transforms insecurity into a market, because late-stage capitalism needs consumers, and bodybuilding creates consumers who will spend money indefinitely on a goal that can never be completed. It's not about health. Health doesn't require 18-inch arms. It's not about fitness. Fitness doesn't require being 250 pounds at 5% body fat. It's not about function. No job requires a bodybuilder physique. It's about creating an artificial need and then selling the solution to that need forever. And the cruelest part? It works, not the transformation. The products mostly don't work, but the system works. People keep buying. People keep training. People keep competing. People keep chasing. Because once you're inside the system, it's very hard to see that the system is the problem. You think the problem is your genetics, your effort, your program. You don't realize the problem is that you were sold a goal designed to keep you unsatisfied. And by the time you figure that out, you're years deep and your identity is wrapped up in it. And walking away feels like losing everything you built. So maybe bodybuilding should never have existed. Maybe it's a cultural pathology disguised as a sport. Maybe it's a business model that exploited male insecurity and built an industry on human inadequacy. Maybe it's a con that convinced millions of people to spend decades and fortunes transforming their bodies into something that doesn't improve their lives and often makes them worse. Maybe Sandow should have stayed a strong man. Maybe McFadden should have kept his magazine focused on health instead of ideals. Maybe the Weeders should have sold vitamins instead of building an empire on impossible standards. Maybe we'd all be better off if no one had ever thought to turn the body into a competition, a commodity, a brand. Or maybe not. The counter-argument, why we had to invent bodybuilding. But here's the other side. Bodybuilding exists because modern life made it necessary. Industrialization and urbanization created a problem. Human bodies that no longer had a purpose. For millennia, the body was a tool for survival. It had to be capable. It had to work. It had to adapt. And then, within 2 generations, most people's bodies became optional. Machines replaced physical labor. Offices replaced farms. Sitting replaced moving. The body stopped being used and started atrophying. And this created a health crisis. Obesity rates started climbing. Cardiovascular disease became the leading cause of death. Diabetes became epidemic. Musculoskeletal problems became universal. Depression and anxiety skyrocketed. And while there are many causes for these trends, one factor is undeniable. Humans are not adapted for sedentary life. We evolved to move, lift, carry, run, climb. When we stop doing those things, our bodies and minds deteriorate. Bodybuilding, or more accurately, resistance training, became one of the solutions. Because here's what bodybuilding does that other forms of exercise don't. It forces adaptation. Yoga is great for flexibility and mindfulness, but it doesn't build significant muscle. Running is great for cardiovascular health, but it doesn't make you stronger. Swimming is low impact and accessible, but it doesn't load your skeleton in ways that prevent osteoporosis. Resistance training does all those things. It builds muscle, which improves metabolic health, increases insulin sensitivity, and prevents age-related wasting. It stresses bones, which triggers bone density increases and prevents fractures. It requires progressive overload, which forces the body to keep adapting rather than plateauing. It's one of the most efficient tools we have for counteracting the physical decline that modern life accelerates. And the mental health benefits are even more profound. For people who struggle with depression, the gym becomes a place where effort produces visible results, something rare in a world where effort often feels meaningless. For people with anxiety, lifting provides a controlled environment where stress can be channeled into something productive. For people with trauma, bodybuilding offers a way to reclaim the body and rebuild a sense of agency. For people who feel powerless, training provides a domain where they have complete control. These aren't fringe benefits. These are primary reasons people train, and they're legitimate. There's also the community aspect. Gyms create cross-generational, cross-class mentorship ecosystems that are increasingly rare in modern society. The 22-year-old kid learning to squat from the 55-year-old veteran lifter. The overweight beginner getting encouragement from the jacked regular. The woman learning to bench press from a male coach who treats her as an athlete, not a gender. These interactions happen in gyms constantly, and they create bonds that transcend normal social barriers. The gym becomes a third place, neither home nor work, where people gather around shared effort and mutual respect. And in an era where third places are disappearing, that matters. Bodybuilding also democratizes transformation in a way few pursuits do. Not everyone can become a doctor, a lawyer, an entrepreneur, an artist. Those paths require intelligence, credentials, capital, talent, luck. But almost anyone can become significantly stronger and more muscular with consistent effort over time. The barrier to entry is low: a gym membership, some basic equipment, and the willingness to work. The learning curve is manageable. You don't need advanced knowledge to get results, just the basics and consistency. And the results are visible and undeniable. This creates a form of meritocracy that's increasingly rare. You can't fake it. You can't buy it without doing the work. You have to earn it. And for people who feel like everything else in life is rigged or unfair, that's psychologically enormous. There's also something primal and satisfying about physical capability. Modern life is abstract. We manipulate symbols, send emails, attend meetings, generate reports. We rarely create anything tangible. We rarely test ourselves physically. We rarely feel strong or capable in our bodies. Lifting weights reintroduces that. It lets you pick up heavy things, control them, move them, dominate them. It creates a feedback loop where you feel competent and powerful, and that feeling transfers to other areas of life. Confidence in the gym becomes confidence in social situations, in career challenges, in facing adversity. The body becomes a foundation. And yes, bodybuilding has pathological expressions. Yes, it can become obsessive, dysmorphic, unhealthy. Yes, the industry exploits insecurity. Yes, the standards are often unrealistic. But dismissing bodybuilding because of its excesses misses the point. Any powerful tool can be misused. Food can become an eating disorder. Exercise can become compulsion. Work can become workaholism. Relationships can become codependence. That doesn't mean we should eliminate food, exercise, work, or relationships. It means we need to use them wisely. And for millions of people, bodybuilding, when approached reasonably, has been genuinely transformative. So maybe bodybuilding had to exist. Maybe it's not a cultural pathology, but a cultural adaptation. Maybe it's how humanity responded to the problem of bodies that no longer had jobs. Maybe it's an imperfect solution to a real problem, and dismissing it entirely means ignoring the benefits it provides to people who need them. Maybe the question isn't, why does bodybuilding exist? But how do we make bodybuilding healthier, more honest, less exploitative? Maybe the answer isn't to eliminate the pursuit, but to reform the industry, challenge the standards, and help people engage within ways that genuinely improve their lives rather than trap them in endless dissatisfaction. Maybe Sando's innovation, the idea that you could deliberately build your body according to a plan, was actually visionary. Maybe the Weeders, for all their commercialism, created a structure that allowed a subculture to become a global movement. Maybe Gold's Gym, for all its mythology, gave people a place to belong. Maybe even the physique magazines, for all their coded content, created a space where the male body could be appreciated, studied, and celebrated in ways mainstream culture didn't allow. Maybe bodybuilding, for all its flaws, is a net positive. Or maybe both arguments are true. Maybe bodybuilding is simultaneously a useful tool and a dangerous trap, a path to self-improvement, and a mechanism for self-destruction, a community and a cult, a sport and a con. Maybe the question isn't which side is right. Maybe the question is, which version of bodybuilding are you participating in? And that depends entirely on why you started, what you're chasing, and whether you're willing to be honest with yourself about what the pursuit is actually giving you versus what it's taking away. The Weider Empire's silent collapse. What happened when the machine stopped? Here's what most people don't know. The Weider Empire, which dominated bodybuilding for 6 decades, collapsed quietly in the 2010s. Not all at once, not dramatically, but thoroughly. Joe Weider died in 2013 at age 93. Ben had died in 2008. Within a few years, the IFBB split into feuding factions over governance disputes. Muscle and Fitness and Flex magazines, once the Bibles of bodybuilding, saw circulation plummet as the industry moved online. Weider Nutrition was sold to a larger corporation and became just another supplement brand. The centralized control the Weiders had built, where they owned the contest, the media, and the products, fragmented into a decentralized ecosystem where power was distributed among influencers, YouTube channels, Instagram accounts, and competing federations. This wasn't just a business transition. It was a fundamental restructuring of how bodybuilding culture operates. In the Weider era, there was a center, a canon, a clear hierarchy. You read the magazines to learn the principles. You competed in IFBB shows to prove yourself. You aspired to win Mr. Olympia, because that was the peak. The path was defined. Now there's no center. There are 1,000 influencers selling 1,000 different programs. There are multiple federations hosting hundreds of shows. There are drug-tested and untested divisions, classic and open categories, bikini and wellness and figure. There's no single authority determining what bodybuilding should look like or how success should be measured. The sport fragmented into subcultures, each with its own aesthetics, ethics, and economies. This is both liberating and disorienting. Liberating because you're no longer beholden to a system controlled by 2 brothers and their business interests. You can define success on your own terms. You can build a following without ever competing. You can make money teaching people how to train without needing the IFBB's approval. You can reject the mass monster aesthetic and pursue a different look. The gatekeepers lost their power. Disorienting because there's no longer a clear path, no single goal, no definitive answer to what is bodybuilding supposed to be. The sport became whatever you decide it is, and that empowering for some, but paralyzing for others. The rise of social media accelerated this. Instagram, YouTube, TikTok. These platforms gave individuals the ability to build audiences that rivaled or exceeded traditional media outlets. A bodybuilder with 2 million Instagram followers has more reach than Flex magazine ever did, and they can monetize that reach directly, selling coaching programs, supplements, apparel, without needing a traditional publisher or sponsor. This created a new class of influencer bodybuilders who make more money than most competitive bodybuilders, despite never winning major titles. They're not the best by traditional metrics, but they're the most marketable, the most relatable, the best at content creation. And in the fragmented landscape, content creation matters more than competitive success. This shift also exposed bodybuilding's judging problem more clearly. When the IFBB was the only game in town, you accepted its judging standards because there was no alternative. Now, there are multiple federations with different standards, and the audience can see the inconsistencies. One federation rewards mass. Another penalizes it. One federation allows enhanced athletes. Another claims to test rigorously, but fails athletes inconsistently. The subjectivity isn't new, but the inability to hide it is. And this has led to a growing sentiment that competing is pointless, that you're better off building a personal brand and skipping the stage entirely. Mr. Olympia still exists. It's still considered the pinnacle by traditionalists, but its cultural dominance has faded. The winners are less well-known outside the bodybuilding community than Arnold or Ronnie Coleman were in their eras. The prize money has increased. First place now wins $400,000, but the cultural cash has decreased. Winning Mr. Olympia doesn't make you a household name anymore. It makes you the king of a niche. And for many aspiring bodybuilders, That's not worth the sacrifice required to get there. So what replaced the Wheater machine? Nothing singular. 1,000 small machines, each serving a fragment of the audience. Some focus on natural bodybuilding, some on power building, some on aesthetics, some on strength, some on health and longevity, some on extreme mass. Each machine has its influencers, its contests, its supplement sponsors, its media channels. And collectively, they generate more money than the Wheater empire ever did. But none of them have the cultural power the Wheaters had, because power is now diffused. And maybe that's healthy. Maybe centralized control was always a problem. Or maybe fragmentation means the sport lost its identity and became 1,000 different things, none of which have the coherence or mythology that made bodybuilding culturally significant in the first place. The returns nobody talks about. What happens when you stop? Here's the part bodybuilding culture avoids discussing. What happens when you quit? Not temporarily, not during an off-season, but when you walk away from the lifestyle entirely. When training stops being your identity. When you eat normally. When you let the body relax into whatever it wants to be without constant manipulation. What happens then? The muscle doesn't disappear immediately. It takes months, sometimes years, but it does disappear. Use it or lose it isn't just a cliche, it's physiology. Muscle is metabolically expensive. The body maintains it only when it's necessary. When you stop training, the body slowly reallocates resources. The muscle atrophies. The definition fades. The size decreases. Within 6 months of stopping, most bodybuilders lose 20 to 30% of their muscle mass. Within a year, they're closer to their genetic baseline than to their peak. The body they spent years building deconstructs itself quietly and efficiently. This is psychologically devastating for people whose identity is wrapped up in their physique. They watch themselves shrink in the mirror. Clothes fit differently. Compliments stop. Other people notice and comment. You look smaller. Are you okay? Which makes it worse. The strength decreases. Weights that felt manageable become challenging again. The confidence that came from being visibly impressive fades. And because bodybuilding culture glorifies permanent transformation, once you build it, you'll always have it. The reality of losing it feels like personal failure rather than inevitable biology. There's also a metabolic cost to years of bodybuilding, especially at the extreme end. The body adapts to calorie restriction by lowering metabolic rate. People who've done multiple cutting phases, dieting down to contest condition repeatedly, often find that their maintenance calories are significantly lower than they were before they started bodybuilding. They gain fat more easily. They have to eat less to stay lean. Their hormones are disrupted. Thyroid function depressed, testosterone suppressed, leptin dysregulated, cortisol elevated. Some of this recovers when training stops and eating normalizes. Some of it doesn't. Some bodybuilders spend the rest of their lives managing metabolic damage caused by years of extreme dieting. The psychological transition is even harder. For years, maybe decades, your daily routine revolved around training and eating. You planned your schedule around the gym. You prepped meals every Sunday. You tracked macros. You measured yourself weekly. You took progress photos monthly. The structure was total. And when that structure disappears, you're left with a void. What do you do with the 2 hours per day you were spending at the gym? What do you think about if you're not thinking about your next workout, your next meal, your next goal? For people who use bodybuilding as an escape from other problems, stopping means confronting those problems again. And often, the problems have gotten worse because you ignored them for years while you were focused on training. This is why some people can't stop. They try. They take breaks, but they always come back, not because they love it, but because they don't know who they are without it. The gym is their community. Training is their identity. The pursuit is their purpose. Stopping feels like ego death, so they keep going, even when their body is breaking down, even when they're no longer enjoying it, even when they know it's unsustainable. Because the alternative, figuring out who you are when you're not a bodybuilder, is too threatening. There are also the health consequences that only show up later. Joint damage accumulates over years of heavy loading. Tendons wear down. Cartilage degenerates. By the time bodybuilders hit their 40s and 50s, many have chronic pain in shoulders, elbows, knees, lower back. Some need surgery. Some can't train anymore, even if they want to. The body that was supposed to be a project of strength and health becomes a source of pain and limitation. And because bodybuilding culture idolizes toughness, training through pain, pushing past limits, many bodybuilders ignored warning signs for years and caused permanent damage. For enhanced bodybuilders, the costs are higher. Long-term steroid use can cause cardiovascular problems that don't manifest until decades later. Left ventricular hypertrophy, arterial stiffness, increased risk of heart attack and stroke. It can permanently shut down natural testosterone production, leaving people dependent on hormone replacement therapy for life. It can damage liver and kidney function. And because these consequences are delayed, people discount them. I feel fine now. I'll deal with that later. But later arrives, and by then the damage is done. Retired pro bodybuilders in their 50s and 60s often have health profiles that look like people 20 years older. So here's the question nobody wants to answer. Was it worth it? If you spent 20 years bodybuilding, built an impressive physique, maybe competed, maybe won some titles, maybe built a following and then you stop, and within 2 years you're back to looking like a normal person who lifts occasionally, was the sacrifice worth it? What did you gain? Memories? Photos? A temporary identity? A sense of accomplishment? And what did you lose? Time? Relationships? Health? Metabolic function? The ability to enjoy food without anxiety? The ability to rest without guilt? The answer varies. For people who bodybuilding was genuinely fulfilling, who loved the process, who built meaningful relationships, who learned discipline that transferred to other areas, who never took it to pathological extremes. Yes, it was probably worth it. For people who use bodybuilding to run from deeper problems, who sacrificed their health and relationships, who ended up with dysmorphia and metabolic damage and chronic pain, no, probably not. But you don't know which category you're in until you're on the other side. And by then, you can't get the years back. The last question. Here we are, 75,000 words later. We've traced bodybuilding from Sandoz Theater to Gold's Gym to Instagram influencers. We've examined the mythology, the science, the psychology, the economics, the costs, the benefits. We've explored why it exists, why it shouldn't, why it had to. We've looked at the culture from every angle, dissected its mechanisms, questioned its premises. And the question remains, what is bodybuilding actually for? Not what it says it's for, self-improvement, discipline, health. What it's actually for underneath the marketing and the mythology. And the answer depends on who you ask. For some, it's a tool for building confidence. For others, it's a trap that perpetuates insecurity. For some, it's a community that saved their life. For others, it's an industry that exploited their vulnerabilities. For some, it's a sport that rewards dedication. For others, it's a business that manufactures dissatisfaction. All of these are true, simultaneously, depending on the person, the context, the approach. Bodybuilding is strange because it's the only sport where the competition is against yourself. But the standard is set by others. You're trying to become your ideal self, except your ideal is shaped by photos, trends, judges, influencers, genetics you don't have. You're building a body that's supposed to represent discipline and strength, except the process can make you weaker and less healthy. You're participating in a subculture that claims to be about authenticity, except the best liars, the people who claim natural while enhanced, who edit photos while preaching realism, are often the most successful. So maybe the strange reason bodybuilding exists is this. It's a mirror for modern life. Modern life tells you you're not enough. Bodybuilding literalizes that message by putting it on your body. Modern life creates anxiety and offers consumption as a solution. Bodybuilding does the same. Here's a problem. Here's a product. Repeat forever. Modern life offers identity through performance rather than essence. You are what you project. Bodybuilding embodies that completely. Your body is your brand, your content, your resume. Modern life is about chasing goals that move when you reach them. Bodybuilding is that chase made flesh. And maybe that's not a bug. Maybe that's a feature. Maybe bodybuilding exists to show us, in exaggerated form, what we're already doing to ourselves in every other domain. We're all building bodies we can't maintain, chasing standards we can't reach, performing identities that exhaust us, buying solutions to problems that were invented to sell us solutions. Bodybuilding just makes it visible. It turns the abstract anxiety of modern existence into pounds, inches, photos, mirrors. And once it's visible, you can't ignore it. You have to decide, is this what I want? Is this making me better? Or is this just a more elaborate way to feel insufficient? The people who found genuine value in bodybuilding didn't find it in the outcomes. They didn't find it in winning contests, building the perfect physique, or hitting a specific measurement. They found it in the process, in learning discipline, in discovering physical capability they didn't know they had, in building relationships with training partners, in creating structure during chaotic periods, in feeling strong when life made them feel weak. The body was never the goal. The body was the vehicle. And for those people, bodybuilding worked exactly as it should. The people who suffered found the opposite. They made the body the goal. They let the pursuit replace the rest of their life. They chased validation that never arrived. They damaged their health for a look that didn't last. They built an identity that collapsed when they could no longer maintain it. For them, bodybuilding was a trap dressed up as a solution. And the trap worked because they didn't see it coming until they were already caught. So the question isn't, should bodybuilding exist? It does exist. It will continue to exist. The question is, if you're going to participate, why are you doing it? What are you trying to build? And what are you willing to sacrifice to build it? Are you using bodybuilding as a tool? Or is it using you? Are you training to become someone you respect? Or are you training to escape someone you don't? Are you satisfied with slow progress? Or are you always comparing yourself to people who have advantages you'll never have? Are you building discipline, or are you building obsession? These are hard questions. Most people avoid them. It's easier to just keep training, keep chasing, keep believing that the next program, the next supplement, the next goal will be the one that finally brings satisfaction. But satisfaction isn't something you build. It's something you decide. And bodybuilding can't teach you that. Only you can. So here's where we end, on a question, not an answer. Because that's what bodybuilding is. It's not a solution. It's not a destination. It's a question that everyone answers differently. And the answer changes depending on who you are, when you ask it, and whether you're willing to be honest with yourself about what you're actually chasing. The body is real. The muscle is real. The strength is real. But the meaning? That's whatever you make it. And maybe that's the strangest reason bodybuilding exists. Not because it solves a problem, but because it forces you to confront one. What are you building and why? Did Sando know what he was starting that night at the Royal Albert Hall, under the lights, while judges measured bodies like architects measuring buildings? Did he know he was inventing a sport that would become an industry, a culture, a mirror, a trap? Probably not. He was just a showman selling tickets. But what he started, deliberately or not, became something much larger. Something that reveals as much about human nature as any novel, any philosophy, any scientific study. Because bodybuilding is us. It's what we do when we're anxious and don't know why. It's what we do when we feel powerless and want control. It's what we do when we're told we're not enough and believe it. It's what we do when we need somewhere to put the energy that has no outlet. It's both the disease and the cure, depending on the dose. And it exists because we needed it to exist. Because modern life created a void, and bodybuilding filled it, for better and for worse. So was it inevitable? Yes. Should it exist? That's not the right question. It exists. The right question is, now that it exists, how do we make it less harmful and more useful? How do we keep the benefits, the discipline, the community, the physical capability, the confidence, while minimizing the costs, the dysmorphia, the obsession, the exploitation, the health damage? How do we teach people to use bodybuilding without letting bodybuilding use them? The answer is education, honesty, realistic expectations, better gatekeeping in the industry, more regulation of supplements and pharmaceutical markets, more emphasis on long-term health rather than short-term aesthetics, more diverse beauty standards, more transparency from influencers and athletes about what's natural versus enhanced, more support for people who develop disordered relationships with training and food, more acknowledgement that the body is a tool for living, not a replacement for living. But mostly, the answer is this: approach bodybuilding like you'd approach any powerful tool, with respect, with caution, with self-awareness. Know what you're doing and why. Know what you're getting and what you're giving up. know when it's helping and when it's hurting, and be willing to walk away if the cost exceeds the benefit, because bodybuilding is optional. The body isn't. And somewhere in a gym right now, someone is looking in the mirror and deciding who they want to become. Maybe they'll find something valuable. Maybe they'll lose years chasing an illusion. Maybe both. The outcome isn't predetermined. It depends on them, on their reasons, on their awareness, on their honesty. And that's the only certainty bodybuilding offers. The person you become depends entirely on why you started, what you're chasing, and whether you're willing to ask yourself before it's too late if the reflection in the mirror is the person you actually want to be. The lights at the Royal Albert Hall went dark in 1901. The crowd dispersed. The contestants left. But what happened that night didn't end. It multiplied. It spread. It became gyms, magazines, contests, industries, identities, obsessions, transformations, communities, and casualties. Bodybuilding exists because we made it exist, and now it makes us. And the question of whether that's good or bad is the question everyone answers for themselves, one rep at a time, for as long as they keep lifting.